Alright, I am here. Welcome everyone to my stream this evening. Had to go and inform my nieces and nephews I was on because they wanted to watch, but I'm here, so yeah, let us jump in. I'm going to be doing a scene underwater this evening, as I would have mentioned on Twitter, and as you can probably tell from the title of the stream. Oh, right. I was just checking something there quickly. Yeah. You can go ahead and share on your social media platforms and such, like I'm about to do, that I'm live. I'm going to be using some open source software. Most likely I will only use Inkscape this evening at least. If I decide to paint this this particular scene further, I'll probably use game and possibly my paint because I'm planning to check them out. So yeah, if you hear any baby noises, by the way, I have a guest this evening, so that's what's going on. In any case, yeah, I'm ready to go. You may notice a slight change in Inkscape's interface. The snapping tools are up in this corner here on the right, as opposed to being toward the right hand side of the screen now, because I'm using a nightly build and some things are changing pretty rapidly, I think, but I'm actually liking the new changes that I'm seeing. Okay, so yeah, you're gonna notice some changes in Inkscape going forward. Alright. Alrighty, so let me get right to it. I just realized the music is not connected to the stream. Let me just fix that quickly. Alright, everything should be back as it should be now. Oops, didn't mean to double tap that. Alright, so for this scene, I'm thinking I'm going to probably set it up so that there's some rocks in this corner. I'm just doing a rough thing right now. And some kelp or something on this side. This is not anything final, so don't worry about how bad it looks. Just kind of getting an idea in mind of what I'm going to do. So some rocks over here, some kelp over here. I kind of want to have depth to this scene, so I'm going to have like some activity going on behind here. Something swimming around this area here. And some activity toward the top up here as well. Alright, so that's basically the gist of what I'm planning to go for. I'm gonna actually turn this layer off and start putting it together. What I might actually do is zoom in and draw some parts of this scene a little smaller than the rest, because I want to have a pretty massive scene. Basically, I want to be a little more detailed than I usually am. Alright, so we're going to start with some rocks down in this corner. And just about, I shouldn't say rocks because it'd be coral, obviously, seeing that we're under the ocean. So, oh wait, I'm in the wrong layer. Let me lock that, and yeah, there we go. Alright, so I'm just going to do a rough outline and build on top of it afterward. But usually when I draw scenes like this, I don't do too much layering in terms of detail, but this time around I want to challenge myself a bit. So this is a little bit more of a freestyle stream than usual. I didn't really have too much of a plan coming into this, but I'm going to try to freestyle and layer stuff on top of itself to create a pretty in-depth scene, I guess. By the way, I'm open to your suggestions, even as I'm drawing. Your suggestions, comments, anything like that. I'm open to everything, so you can drop them in the chat if you have any questions or comments or whatever. I actually forgot to share that I am live on Twitter. I went to, but I forgot, so I will do that and then come back. Alright, I'm ready to go again. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is add some other kinds of coral sticking out from here. I had the opportunity years ago. This is gonna be a disappointing story before I give it, by the way, but I had the opportunity years ago to go on a submarine and I declined. I was very young, probably like 4 or 5 or something, and I was too scared to go under the water, so I never actually got the opportunity. I would love to again though someday. It's really cool, but I just was too scared to do it. I have since been out to sea on boats and stuff like that, but never actually got to go under the water and see this stuff live and in action. And being in the Caribbean, that should be, you know, like a privilege that I get to have. But hey, one day I'll actually do that. Now that I'm older, it's a dream of mine to do that. So maybe I'll actually get some inspiration. Oh, by the way, as I always mention in every stream now, I'm using music from creators live on YouTube. I'll drop the link to the playlist actually. Let me see if I can pull it up from here directly. I'll drop the link to the playlist in the chat shortly. There you go. Yeah, Creators Lib, they provide free music and sound effects for creators like YouTube and Twitch and other platforms. I was going to say channels, but I meant to say platforms, other platforms, so we can use their music for free. I think that's really cool. I try to produce some free content myself as well. I think it's good to support each other in those ways, because you know, this world is expensive enough as it is to live in. And I also believe in, of course, supporting those who produce free content and free software. So if you can, go support their channel, subscribe, check their stuff out. They also have a store as well, so you can actually support them monetarily. And I also put a little plug in here for the Inkscape developers. If you can donate, please do that, because this software is really useful, but it's developed for free. You would never believe that there are no, well, I don't know if I could say there are none at all, but there are not many paid developers when it comes to Inkscape and most other open source software. So make sure and donate if you're able. And if you're not able, it's always cool to just, you know, tell a friend or something about it and dispel some of those myths that are out there. Like the lie that open source software isn't as good as other software. That's not true. Obviously not. I mean, I'm using it right now, so obviously not. Right, let me check something here, see if this is... Okay, cool, that's as small as I wanted it. I didn't want this to be too big because I want this scene to be extremely complex. So this is at the right size for me. I'm gonna put a little creature here sticking out its head. By the way, I'm going to be drawing some fictional creatures as well in this scene, so if you see anything that looks a little strange and you can't recognize what it is, it's fictional. I'm not trying to actually produce accurate to nature drawings today. I'm just having some fun doing an underwater scene in a general sense. Brush a little smaller because I need to draw some finer details here. Random fact for you, for those who don't know, a lot of the creatures that we call things like shrimp, for instance, are not actually shrimp on a technical level, despite their name. So like mantis shrimp are their own group of creatures, and I'm trying to remember the others. There are some others too. There's some that look like crabs. I can't remember what they're called now. But yeah, there are a whole bunch of different kinds of creatures we call shrimp that aren't shrimp. And then you have some that look like shrimp, but they're not shrimp either. So like krill, for instance, are also their own thing. I find that really fascinating because nature is so full of so many things that, you know, seem to overlap in design, but they're completely different from each other despite looking so similar. And each one of them has its own function. Of course, there's redundancy, because any wise designer designing a system would design it with redundancy in place. So nature, of course, is designed so that there's a lot of redundancy. Like, a lot of these creatures perform the same tasks in their particular environments, but still there is a uniqueness to them. So for instance, you might find that despite sharing the same trophic level, which is they basically eat the same kinds of food, or eat like at the same level of the food chain, if you will, that some creatures perform a task that others that are similar to them just cannot perform. And if you remove them from the system, though the system can survive, the entire system becomes a little less healthy than before. So it's still fascinating when you consider the fact that there's so much diversity in nature, and yet it's like it overlaps, but that overlap is still with some degree of uniqueness in place, that the overlap is not a complete and total overlap. I don't know if I explained that as well as I wanted to, but yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Alright, let's see how this how this turns out. Okay, not bad. I'm really liking this technique that I'm using today, which is, even though I'm not drawing on different layers, I'm still layering details in by drawing things smaller first and then adding them to the scene. Well, not really adding them to the scene, but at least looking at the bigger picture in my mind when I zoom back out. I think this is a pretty good technique to use. I don't usually do this that often. You'll normally see me draw a scene, like a big thing at once, but I'm kind of enjoying taking my time today and doing smaller details. Oh, by the way, another fun fact, I learned something recently. Seagrass is actually grass. I did not know that until recently. I thought that seagrass was just a term for some kind of plant or some kind of algae or something that grows underwater and looks like grass, but it turns out seagrass is actually an aquatic kind of grass, which I found absolutely amazing. But it also turns out that seagrass is the only true plant, as in vascular plant, and not algae or anything like that, that lives underwater. Well, not lives underwater, but lives in a marine environment, sorry. There are other aquatic plants, but no other, well, except for mangroves, I think it is, but, or is it the only grass, something like that, that lives in a marine environment, which I also found very fascinating. But it's so widespread, you never guess that it's so unique. Let's draw a little fish here. I'm always amazed at nature in the sense that you have fish that are smaller than some of the largest, well, let me not even say invertebrates, the largest arthropods, so like, or even let's say like crustaceans and stuff. You have some that are even smaller than some of the regular sized ones. Like you have some that could be just a few centimeters or, you know, several millimeters long, and then you have sometimes other creatures that we normally think of as small that can be gigantic, like take for instance having those crabs, I forgot what they're called, that live in Japan, grow the size of like basketballs, like the body is the size of a basketball and the legs are several feet across. I find that amazing. And then you have like bacteria, for instance. The largest bacterium is the size of a comma, which is like visible to the naked eye, but it's still bacteria. So I'm often fascinated by the fact that you can have such an amazing amount of complexity in such a small space, and yet you can also have some of these supposedly most simple creatures, because nothing is really all that simple, but things we consider to be simple that are so big. Now, due to the benefit of using vector graphics to draw this today, I can actually create a school of these fish by duplicating them, which I think is also pretty cool. So I'm going to do that right away. Just copy and move them around. Of course, I have to be careful not to make them overlap in the wrong places, because that will be pretty obvious that they're transparent. But yeah. I think this is pretty cool. Wow. I mean, I'm the one drawing this, but I'm still amazed at how cool this looks, having done the details so much smaller and then zooming out. I like really complex scenes, even though I normally don't draw them, but the only reason I don't draw them that often these days is the lack of time. When I was younger, this is something I used to do practically every day. because I love complexity and detail. What I'm going to do next is, oops, didn't mean to rotate. I'm going to draw a little bit from nature, real life nature, and actually draw a feather duster worm. I've never actually done one before, so let's see how this comes out. The technique I'm going to use is to draw some vertical lines first, because they have spirals around them, basically. Like, they actually have gills, or I can't remember if they use their gills to feed or not. I think they do, though, to filter food like how some fish do. So I'm going to draw these spirals around consecutively like this, and then I'm going to fill those in the center and with some smaller lines to kind of create that feathered effect that they have. Alright, I think this is coming out relatively well. I wasn't sure how this would come out, even though I had the technique in mind. I usually try to plot my techniques out before I actually use them or implement them. Kind of like when you're doing programming or like web design or anything like that. But drawing is one of those things where sometimes you just have to get started and see what happens. And I mean, obviously I could perfect this technique or even use other techniques in the future when I have to draw a feather duster worm, or look at one in real life and, well, not in real life, but look at a photo of one and try replicating that. But going from memory, I don't think I did the worst of jobs, at least. And I'm trying to learn to be a little less of a perfectionist, so I guess that pays off on its own. Just had to adjust my headset because it keeps slipping off. I have too much hair and too little headset, so it keeps slipping off of my head. Alright, now comes the tricky part, which is the very top, where it kind of forms a little Christmas tree kind of look. Alright, let's see how this looks zoomed out. Not terrible. I mean, in my personal opinion, it could be better, but it's not terrible. At least it has somewhat of the look of a feather duster worm from memory. Oh, sorry, folks. My mic was muted for a while. I was talking a lot, but my mic was muted and I didn't realize. Sorry about that. Alright, let's give him a nose. Trying to give this a slightly transparent look, seeing as it's coming from an angle where the light would actually be coming from behind here and showing through the front. And so you would actually see that transparent capsule over the eye. Well, I was saying earlier, but this would have been missed. I'm trying to practice drawing things from different angles because all my life I've done mostly side angle perspective, so I'm trying to get some practice with drawing things from the front, drawing things like at slight turns, different stuff like that, trying to improve my skills in various areas. You're just fortunate enough to get to watch that process in action. I'm one person who doesn't mind learning in the open. Well, I was also saying something else earlier too that was probably missed when my mic was off. I forgot that I didn't have it on and y'all would have missed this. I believe that possibly one of the reasons why fish have mouths that point upward, even though we say point downward, they actually point upward, or most fish do, is because they live in a thicker medium than we do. We live in air, they live in water, and they actually can use the thickness of the water to their advantage to suck prey into their mouths, and upward pointing mouth would make that easier to create the pressure differential for that purpose. Just happens to have the effect of looking very funny. Alright, let's see what he looks like when we zoom out. He's rather tiny, but that's still good. I like this detail. which point I'm at over here. Okay. I'm gonna draw him a mate, and I'm gonna try to put her swimming at an angle and looking up. So I'm rotating the screen on purpose this time. I'm gonna give her less of a dorsal fin for some dimorphism. A little less common in fish than most other vertebrates, I think. Although it still does happen because many fish have some pretty extravagant dimorphism. Dimorphism, of course, being that the males and the females are in different forms, usually for the purpose of like attracting each other, or sometimes some are different forms so they can take up different roles. So like some are defensive, and sometimes like you have extreme forms like anglerfish, and I don't think any of their relatives do that, but I know in anglerfish the males are just basically there for one purpose. So when they're born, they don't live much longer than, well, I mean, they live for the rest of their lives attached to their mate, but basically they are born with a mouth and eyes, well, no, a mouth and a nose and a body to swim with. That's basically all they have. And once they're born, they try to find a female to attach themselves to. And after that, they fuse with her and the rest is history. But most fish don't have that level of dimorphism. Even if there are some differences, they're a little less likely to be, you know, as differentiated as, say, like birds and mammals and that kind of stuff. But I'm still going to make her look a little different from her mate. Now her gill covers will be partially visible as well from this angle, so I'm just going to draw in at least one here. Let's give her some nostrils as well. Now I'm just filling in some detail. They are barely visible at this point, but I like that because that means that there's a whole lot more scene to see, so to speak. Yeah, she looks just like a warhead coming up from below as if she's investigating something. Now I'm going to try to draw a fish from behind. I think I'm going to copy our friends from over here too and put them in some other places, give us some more detail. Alright, I forgot I had them grouped already, so I can just duplicate and move. I wonder what painters from back in like the 1800s and 1700s and stuff would say if they could see this. They'd probably be like, nah, that's magic. You know? A lot of stuff that we take for granted today would look like magic if you go back long enough. And I try to add some detail over here now to make it look like there are some crevices and stuff. As always, I'm building on the principle of organized chaos and stacking simplicity. So you'll notice that I'm just doing some seemingly random lines around here. It gives the appearance of a more natural process forming whatever hole this is. I'm going to fill that hole in too, by the way, not to worry. get back to the rest of the detail around there. I'm going to take care of the darker lines first, and then we're going to get to the less dark lines, if you want to call it that, to give it some shading. Shading isn't something I usually do when I'm doing scenes like this, but since I'm going for a more or less realistic looking scene, I'm going to do it this time around. So I'm going to get a lighter grey and make this pretty small, and then I'm going to start filling in up in here. Those darker colors will give us the sharper edges, so to speak, that are more visible to the naked eye, and then the lighter greys will give us the appearance of depth, but we're going to stack more and more grey on top of this until we get the correct appearance. So this is just to start the process, basically. I think that looks pretty good there. Now let's add some more shading by going with a slightly darker grey on top of that. And I'm doing this one closer to the edge up here where the light would be least visible. I'm going to put some more of it in the rest of the crevice, but not as thick as at the top. Darker grey than that now. Back in this same corner again. Lay it on kind of heavy. And then put some more in the rest of the crevice. With a kind of light grey here, I'm going to start putting in some circular motions to fill in those empty areas. Alright, that's probably a little too thin, so let me make this thicker. That's a bit too thick. If I was thinking, I probably would have put these on some lower layers so that the black shows up on top of them, but oh well. I can always go back over that again when I'm done. I could also use blurring, but I'm not going to overdo it with the realism on this stage of this drawing. That stuff can be fixed and sorted out when I decide to paint it, or if I decide to paint it. I may leave it black and white, but if I do paint it, I'll probably go back over some of these and sort out any miscellaneous details that need sorting. If you're wondering why straight lines and then circular lines, I'm basically breaking up the appearance of one particular direction of shading with these circular lines. So at a level where it's zoomed out, your eyes may not necessarily pick up the fine-grained detail, but they'll more see it as a natural look than what you can see at this zoom level right now. Those are some tricks of the trade that I like to use, basically tricking your vision into seeing what's not really there, or sometimes tricking your vision into seeing something that is there, but it's not quite as clean as it looks at a certain level. Also has to do with how our eyes tend to fill in any information that they can't determine from the available light source or whatever that they're picking up. Our eyes are some pretty interesting machines. Alright, so you see what I mean now. It doesn't look like if I just went up and down like this. It looks a lot more natural. But it still looks shaded as if an artist drew it. I mean, an artist did draw it because he just watched me do it, but it looks a lot more natural, but still has that artistic look to it. Just going back over the black now over some of these areas. Well, not black really, but dark grey. Let's get something really thin again and fill in this top part with some black. Doing it up and down first. Then circular motion. I'm going wider this time because I wanted to spread more. If not, I would do smaller circles closer together. You may be thinking when you're layering like this, but I'm just covering over the things I already did. Not quite, because what's important is also the gaps that you left behind. Alright, let's see how that looks. Looks a lot more natural now to me, and if I go back to a zoom level of 100%, it should look super natural. Yeah, it looks a lot more detailed. Alright, my niece just requested something pretty cool, which is a starfish. So that's what I'm going to do next. I keep rotating when I don't mean to rotate. Bad habits die hard. Alright, now for that starfish. Now seeing as this is going to be laying on the rock at an angle, I'm going to draw the arms at different sizes and also draped across something basically so they're going to be curved a bit. A little note about starfish and their relatives like brittle stars and stuff. They tend to be based on multiples of 5 in terms of the numbers of arms that they have. So if you're going to draw them, usually try to make sure that's what you're doing. So like if it's a starfish, 5 arms. If it is one of those larger, I can't remember the term for those, but the larger ones that sometimes have like more arms than 5, so maybe 10, 15, 25, that kind of stuff. If you go for a brittle star or any of those, more like 50, you know, well, maybe not that many, but there's some that may have up to that many arms, but always on multiples of 5. I can't remember what you call them. Oh yes, echinoderms, and their name actually, I think, refers to something to do with the either the shape or the number of arms that they have or something like that. But all starfish and their relatives, which would be starfish, brittle stars, sea urchins, sand dollars, crinoids, and something that I can't remember offhand right now, but I know that there are others. All of them have 5 points of symmetry, basically. Alright, so we're going to put our starfish on top of another outcrop. Now, as weird and as sometimes as small as they may be too, but as weird as they may look, starfish are actually some pretty high level predators in their ecosystem, because they actually feed pretty high up on the food chain if you really understand where they lay. Being that they feed on clams, and clams often feed on plankton, but those plankton that the clams eat, well, not only clams, but bivalves and other mollusks of that type that can't really run. That's what most starfish eat. Some starfish and their relatives also eat other starfish and other creatures, but they're relatively high up on their area of the ecosystem, or their level of the ecosystem. I don't know of many animals that actually eat starfish, although some do. Obviously they do have predators, but not that many that I know of. So they're pretty high up on the food chain, at least within their particular piece of the ecosystem. Just goes to show everything is a matter of perspective, because you might look and say, but they're so small, but they are actually not only predators, but pretty important predators. One another thing, this is not an eye that I'm drawing by the way, but starfish can see, believe it or not. They actually use the structure of the crystals in their arms that help to give them strength to see. Not to see very well, obviously, because they don't have the kind of eyesight that we do. I don't think they even form pictures in most cases as far as I'm aware, but they can see. Obviously, they don't necessarily use their sight to find prey or necessarily to evade predators, because they're not that fast, but they can tell day from night. They can tell if something's hovering above them by the shadows and stuff like that. And I'm not sure just how acute their eyesight is, but it's possible it may have other purposes as well. A lot of these things though are only recent discoveries, so there's still a lot we don't know about many creatures, including some of the ones that you see every day and draw every day. Which is why I often say nature is a lot more complex than we give. I wouldn't say give it credit for, but give the creator credit for. Nature is pretty intricate, and there's so much detail left to be discovered in some of the most common things, which is why we should probably take a little better care of the earth in a general sense. Like, take for instance, you've probably seen the Prevagen ads on TV before. Imagine getting a medication for your brain from jellyfish, and jellyfish look like some of the most simple, basic, pointless creatures, and yet jellyfish are so complex, and some of them are nearly immortal. because what they do is they have a life cycle where they turn from jellyfish to polyp back to jellyfish without ever dying. So it's quite possible that they're literally immortal. And they're just simple creatures that don't have a brain. In most cases, don't have eyes. Box jellyfish have eyes, but most jellyfish don't even have eyes. Don't have ears. Hardly have any internal organs. 90-something% water, and yet many of them, or some of them at least, probably already have a form of immortality. And we humans are fortunate if we live 100 years. So that should put some things in perspective. And it should humble us a bit. By the way, the reason I'm drawing more than one starfish, usually starfish are not found as singles. You usually find a bunch of them in one area. Less so to do with them being gregarious. They're not colonial animals for the most part, but they do tend to be found wherever their food is. So if you have one starfish, you'll usually have more. Funny enough, I live in a country where we have access to beaches and stuff like that. I have probably seen in all my life at the most like 2 starfish, and none of them were alive. Those were starfish that other people brought to us. Just goes to show you how this world is such an interesting place. I live on an island and we're surrounded by water, so I've been to the beach quite a bit, and I don't remember ever seeing a starfish at the beach. Not once. Now, of course, with starfish around, you're going to need to have some bivalves for them to eat. So I'm going to draw some kind of a clam-like creature here. Of course, as I said, I'm drawing fictional stuff today, so instead of drawing a typical clam, I'll draw something a little more interesting. Well, not more interesting, just different, because clams are pretty interesting on their own, but yeah, something a little different. Clams definitely do not have tentacles like this thing, so I'm going to make it a little different by adding tentacles to it. Kind of like pulling from the theory of a barnacle, but barnacles are actually using legs as opposed to using well, appendages are more or less like their legs as opposed to using tentacles, because they're arthropods, so they don't have tentacles, even though they look like tentacles. Speaking of barnacles, I recently found out about a species, or well, not a species, a group. There's a whole bunch of them. I don't remember that. A whole bunch of species of them. But they're barnacles that are actually parasitic. And so most of their body consists of eggs and not much else. But they basically infect other arthropods like crabs and stuff, take over the area where the crab would normally grow her eggs, and then trick the crab into releasing their eggs into the water. Nature is scary. But that's also a pretty wise strategy. Instead of spending a whole bunch of energy on growing body parts and evading predators and doing all that stuff, take over another animal, make it do all the work for you. No need to have a digestive system, no need to have a circulatory system, no need for anything. Just a whole bunch of eggs, and all you have to do is reproduce. So from an energy standpoint, that's a pretty smart strategy. Of course, that's not the original plan for the world, but hey, that's the world we live in. So some animals have just given up on having bodies and having a purpose, and all they do is just make more of themselves, like a virus. Goes to show you, no horror movie can come close to nature in terms of being messed up. Nature is just out of whack. I'll let this one over here be open. And this will show that the tentacles come from one side and the other side is not carrying anything. Alright, let's see how this looks when I zoom out. Wonderful. This scene is becoming really fun. I'm gonna have fun working on this probably for the next number of weeks, even. Alright, so before I close off this stream, what I'm going to do is probably start drawing a larger creature up in here. So let me get a new layer for that and drop that creature in. As soon as Inkscape decides to respond to me, that is. Oh, I see what happened. It's very complex, that layer, and it didn't want to turn itself off. Alright, so roughly around here. Cool. Now I'm gonna pull from one of my own stories that I would have been writing a number of years ago and draw a creature that I would have come up with for that story. So let me start drawing the eye first. When I'm drawing vertebrates, I tend to start with their eyes for some reason. I guess it really is true that eyes are the window to the soul, so even when it comes to art, eyes are the window to the soul of the art that I'm doing. I've been thinking about this story that these creatures would have come from recently in terms of getting back to writing it, but I'll probably have to change quite a bit in the story for it to be viable. But basically the gist of it is human beings trying to play a god. So the idea is that there are some islands in the Pacific, and humans being, well, let me start again. I started to lose my train of thought. There are some volcanic aliens in the Pacific that kind of form, like, probably I think it was supposed to be around our time, because I started writing this many years ago. So like around the time we were living in, now these volcanic islands form in the Pacific. There are about 21 major islands and then a whole bunch of other islands around them. And in a bid to save many of the dying species on the planet, they set up labs on these islands and start doing genetic experimentation and stuff like that. They also have some other nefarious plans in the midst of it. But they create all kinds of creatures and all kinds of combinations of creatures for developing medicines, trying to find ways to preserve the genetic information of various creatures and stuff like that. And also, of course, creating bioweapons at the same time. And then, along the way, a number of years into the project, something goes terribly wrong. And suddenly all the systems they have in place to safeguard things shut down, and now you have thousands of people trapped on these islands with creatures from I wouldn't say what the hell, but let's just say they're not, some of them are not very nice, and some of them are pretty big. So yeah, that's a very bad summary of the story, but basically what ends up happening is it becomes a kind of survival story, and also begins to unfold into some deeper stuff like conspiracies and different stuff like that that were going on for years and years. Someday I plan to revisit that story and actually see if I can modernize it and build it into something interesting and useful, but we'll see how that goes. Now this particular creature here doesn't quite look like the original design I had, but they're basically a blend between all kinds of vertebrates into one group. So they're a group of creatures. I had, funny enough, called them mixids, which is very simple and doesn't convey what they really are, but some of them look like dinosaurs, some look like dragons, some look like all sorts of stuff. But this particular group here, these are called Tarpacon, and the subgroup is Klyptonichids, and this one would have been Syncoclyptonicus. So basically the idea is that this particular group has hidden digits in their flippers that can be pulled into the flipper or revealed at any given time to allow them to walk on land and that kind of stuff like that. This particular one though wouldn't really be able to walk on land necessarily because the flippers are too well adapted for living in water. But yeah, long story short, the largest of them is supposed to be kind of like one of the most dangerous creatures to ever exist, and so in the story it ends up wreaking havoc. But these little ones, I mean, they're not that small, they're large compared to a human being, but these relatively small ones are just kind of like there for decoration. They don't really do anything dangerous in the story. Now don't mind I'm drawing off the canvas, I'm gonna resize this when I'm done, so I don't mind going off canvas right now. Small note too, this one is actually a baby because the head should not be so short and cute. Should be a little longer and a little more menacing, but I decided to go with a baby instead. Maybe if I get the vibe, I might draw an adult. Thanks to using vector graphics, I can resize this as much as I need to and still keep all the details, so I may draw the adult at some point and put the baby next to it or something. Another thing about these is that they actually have external ears. Not very useful underwater, but I just thought, hey, if we're going to blend mammals and birds and reptiles and all sorts of stuff together, they should have features from pretty much all of them visible, at least on some of the creatures. So even though these are aquatic animals, I kept the external ears. Even the largest of them have them. I'm going to give it some stripes, which is a hallmark of quite a number of the creatures that I tend to design. I don't know what it is with me and stripes, but I think they look cool. Drawing from this perspective is a little bit of a challenge for me as well, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. Definitely different from my usual side-on view. I'm going to try to put some detail of fur here. You'll find another signature of the creatures I design tends to be having a mane if they have hair, because that's just me. I think it looks cool. But it also differentiates my stuff from other fictional things, because most people don't add manes to their fictional animals, no matter what they are. That's me. I'll add a mane to just about everything. Even my birds have giant crests on them. Remember, some counter shading should be visible around here. Alright, let's get some teeth in her mouth, and I am going to resize her and then call it a day on this stream. just cleaning up around her mouth so that when I add the teeth, it will be a little easier for me. Looks like my tablet got stuck. Alright, there we go. There we go. Okay, clearly I forgot to select first. Alright, that looks a lot cleaner now. Now I can give her some nice and massive front teeth. Small note about teeth when it comes to realism. If you're going to be doing a creature like, say, a large whale or something that eats other animals, like large animals, when it's underwater, well, I mean, underwater or above water doesn't really matter as much in terms of eating, other than the fact that most underwater creatures don't have like limbs and stuff to rely on. So the majority of the time their teeth are going to be a little more blunt because the point is to grab and hold. Whereas with creatures that are on land, their whole point may be to grab and slice at the same time in order to kill, or sometimes they may need to puncture and suffocate and do all that kind of stuff. But underwater creatures like large whales and stuff, if they do use their teeth at all, will typically need those large blunt teeth that can just grab on and hold on until, you know, job is done, or grab and swallow at the same time. So you won't typically see large serrated teeth, except for, interestingly enough, creatures like large sharks, like great whites. But that's because their hunting strategy typically involves biting and then moving away temporarily till the prey bleeds out. So their teeth are large but serrated at the edges, as opposed to being large and more or less blunt to hold on, or blunt to cause a lot of damage and kill at the same time. So that was just a little note as to why her teeth are more blunt than serrated or sharp as such. They're still sharp in a technical sense because they're pointed, but they're more blunt from the standpoint of appearance. Like, they're thicker and stuff is what I mean. Alright, I think this is good for now. I'll add more detail at a later point. I'm going to resize her now. Good, there we go. Of course, angles are important as well because I drew her flippers to be at a particular angle, so I can't rotate outside of it too much. Alright, good. That should be good there. On another layer, let me add some splashes, or at least some spirals, I mean, coming down from up here. Just to give the impression of her having come down from above. Maybe she went for a jump and just dove back in the water, so some spirals are following her at this point. Alright, that should be that for today's stream. I will come back to this at a future date. My next stream, I'm not quite sure when that will be in terms of what day, because I'm planning to introduce, as I said in my last stream, planning to introduce some other days, not so much sporadically, but you know, just trying out different days and seeing what works, so I can develop a schedule, so to speak. But I will definitely be back next Thursday, God willing, to do another stream. I will most likely be continuing in Inkscape, but that will more likely be a teaching stream more than just me designing something at random. So possibly I may continue flat design, or I may touch on something else depending on what I choose to do in between now and then. The week after that Thursday will be CSS for sure, but some of my other streams in between will be CSS streams because I have a lot that I want to cover. And yeah, that should be that for now. You can check out my YouTube channel. Obviously you're watching me on Twitch now, but you can check out my YouTube channel, my Twitter, and other locations. You can find all those on my website, rolanditsr.pro. And if you need any design work or any video editing work, if you need to get set up with like platforms like cloud services, etc., you can go to my services page, rolanditsr.pro/services, and check out what I'm offering. Also, make sure to check out my stores, teespring.rolanditsr.pro, redbubble.com/people/rolanditsr, and then yeah, I don't think I have anything else to mention other than I hope you enjoyed this stream and have a good night. So I'll see you all next time.